She walked up to my table, looked at my worn handbag, and laughed. "Someone like you doesn't belong with a man like Theodore," she said. "You're poor, you'll always be poor." I smiled and said nothing. She had no idea that in 6 days she would be begging me for her job back. "Before I start, I want you to promise me something. If you have ever been underestimated, ever been laughed at by someone who thought they knew your whole story from one glance, stay until the end, because this isn't just my story. This is for every woman who has been told she isn't enough right before she proved she was everything. Like this video if you believe silence can be the loudest kind of power, and let's begin." I was eating lunch alone on a Tuesday afternoon when my whole marriage fell apart in front of strangers, and I didn't even flinch. The cafe was small, quiet, the kind of place I liked because nobody bothered me there. I had a salad in front of me and my phone in my hand, going through emails from my company, when a shadow fell across my table. I looked up. A woman stood there in a bright red dress, her sunglasses pushed up into her hair, her handbag worth more than my entire outfit. I didn't recognize her at first. Then she smiled, and something about that smile made my stomach turn cold. "You're Sophia, right, Theodore's wife?" I nodded slowly. "Do I know you?" "I'm Priya," she said, like the name should mean something to me. "I work with Theodore, we're close." I felt it before she said another word. The way she said close wasn't about a coworker. It was a woman announcing something, daring me to react. "That's nice," I said, keeping my voice even. "Tell him I said hi." She laughed, and it wasn't a kind laugh. She looked down at my handbag, the same brown leather bag I'd carried for 4 years because I liked it, not because I couldn't afford another one, and her eyes flicked over my simple blouse, my flat shoes. "You know," she said, sitting down across from me without asking, "I always wondered what kind of woman Theodore married. Now I understand." "Understand what?" "That he settled." She leaned back, comfortable, like she was enjoying herself. "Someone like you doesn't belong with a man like Theodore. Look at you. You're poor, Sophia. You'll always be poor. Some women are just born to stay small." The cafe was quiet enough that a couple at the next table glanced over. My face felt hot, but not from shame, from something else. Something calm and dangerous settling behind my ribs. I could have told her the truth right there. I could have said the name of the company that paid Theodore's salary, the company where he sat in his little office thinking he was climbing a ladder I had built with my own hands. I could have watched her face change in that instant. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up my fork, took a bite of my salad, and said, "Enjoy your day, Priya." She looked disappointed, like she wanted tears, wanted a scene, wanted to feel like she'd won something. When she didn't get it, she stood up, flipped her hair, and walked out like a woman who had just delivered a verdict. I sat there a long moment after she left. Then I paid the bill, left a good tip, and walked to my car without hurrying. Because here's what she didn't know, what Theodore didn't fully know either, not anymore. I wasn't poor. I hadn't been poor in a very long time, and in less than a week, both of them were going to learn exactly who I was. To understand how we got here, I have to take you back 3 years, to when Theodore and I first got married. Back then, he was a junior architect at a small firm, working long hours for little pay, always talking about the buildings he dreamed of designing someday. I loved that about him, the hunger, the hope in his voice when he talked about the future. What he didn't know was that I already had a future most people spend their whole lives chasing. My father built a textile company from nothing, starting with 2 sewing machines in a rented room. By the time he passed, that company, Halden Textiles, had grown into something with contracts across 3 countries. He left it to me, all of it, majority shares, full control, a seat that most people in that industry would kill for. I never told Theodore. It wasn't about lying to him. I told myself I wanted him to love me for who I was, not for what I owned. I'd seen what money did to people, how it changed the way they looked at you, how some men married women for exactly what I had. I wanted something real first, so I kept it quiet, ran the company through trusted directors, lived simply, and let Theodore believe I worked a modest administrative job that paid our bills. For a while it worked beautifully. We were happy. We built a life on Tuesday dinners and weekend walks and long talks about nothing important. I thought that happiness was permanent. Then about a year ago, Theodore got a new job, a real one, at a growing company with good pay and real opportunity. He came home so excited that night, talking about how this was finally his chance to prove himself. The company was Halden Textiles. My company. I remember standing in our kitchen, holding a spoon, listening to him talk about his new position, and feeling my heart drop into my stomach. I never told him the truth. I let him take the job, telling myself it was fine, that he'd earned it on his own merit, that it had nothing to do with me since I stayed out of daily operations. I told myself a lot of things that year. most of them were lies I needed to survive. The changes started small enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Theodore began staying late at the office, first once a week, then 3 times, then almost every night. He'd come home smelling like unfamiliar perfume and blame it on crowded elevators. His phone started living face down on tables, buzzing at strange hours, going silent whenever I walked into the room. I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket while doing laundry, a hotel 40 minutes from his office, dated a Wednesday when he told me he was working late. I stared at that little piece of paper for a long time before folding it back up and putting it exactly where I found it. I wasn't ready to know yet. Some part of me was still hoping I was wrong. Then I found the second phone, hidden in the side pocket of his gym bag, an old cracked screen device I'd never seen him use. I didn't unlock it, I didn't need to. Just holding it in my hand told me everything I was too afraid to admit out loud. My assistant, a sharp young woman named Talia who managed most of my company communications, mentioned something to me one afternoon that I couldn't shake off. "There's a new hire in the design department," she said, going through routine reports with me. "Priya Malhotra. She's been introduced to 3 senior executives in the last 2 months, each time your husband brought her along, calling her someone important in his future." I remember setting down my pen very slowly. "His future," I repeated. That's the phrase he used, twice, according to the meeting notes. I didn't say anything else that day. I just nodded, thanked Talia, and went back to my reports, my hands steady even though my chest felt like it was caving in. That was 3 weeks before Priya walked up to my table in that cafe and told me I was poor. After the cafe, I went home and sat in my car in the driveway for almost 20 minutes before going inside. I needed that time to decide what kind of woman I was going to be. I could be the wife who cried, who confronted Theodore with tears and accusations, who begged him to explain himself. Or I could be the woman my father raised, the one who built spreadsheets before she built friendships, who learned that emotion without strategy gets you nowhere in a boardroom or a marriage. I chose strategy. That night, I called Talia and asked her to pull every piece of documentation connected to Theodore's department for the past 6 months. Financial records, meeting attendance, performance reviews, communication logs, everything a controlling shareholder is legally entitled to review, whether the employees in question know she exists or not. "Is everything okay?" Talia asked carefully. "It will be," I said, "just get me what I need," quietly. 2 days later, she called me with something that changed everything. "There's a recording," she said, "from a meeting last month. The design team uses an internal system that records strategy sessions for compliance. Your husband and Priya are on it. You need to hear this yourself." I met her at a small office downtown that evening, away from Haldon's main building, away from anyone who might recognize me. She played the recording on her laptop, and I sat there in a plastic chair listening to my husband's voice. "Once we push out the older managers," Theodore was saying, "there's room for both of us to move up fast. The board doesn't watch this department closely. Nobody's paying attention." Priya's voice came in clear and confident, "And once you're senior enough, we don't need anyone else's approval for anything. We just need to look valuable long enough to get there." "Dead weight goes first," Theodore said, "then we're set." I sat perfectly still, listening to my husband talk about destroying careers like he was planning a vacation. This wasn't just an affair anymore. This was 2 people using my company, my father's legacy, as a stepping stone for their own ambition, planning to hurt innocent employees along the way. I felt something shift inside me, not heartbreak exactly, something colder, something that looked a lot like resolve. "Thank you," I told Talia quietly. "Set up an emergency shareholders meeting this Friday. I want the full board there, and I want Theodore's department invited as if it's routine." "They'll ask why," she said. "Tell them it's about restructuring for growth," I said. "That part at least is true." The 4 days leading up to that meeting were the strangest of my life. I went home every night and looked at Theodore across the dinner table, listening to him talk about his day like nothing was wrong. He'd smile at me, ask about my office job, complain about deadlines, and I'd nod and respond like a woman who knew nothing. It was exhausting wearing that mask, but I needed him relaxed. I needed Priya confident. I needed them both walking into that boardroom on Friday believing they were untouchable. On Wednesday night, Theodore came home late again, and this time he didn't even bother explaining. He just said he had a lot of work and went straight to the shower. I sat on the edge of our bed, looking at the wedding photo on our dresser, a photo of 2 people who used to talk about everything. I thought about crying, I thought about screaming at him right there. Instead, I picked up my phone and reviewed the agenda Talia had prepared for Friday's meeting one more time. By Thursday, word had spread through the design department that a shareholders' meeting was happening. Theodore came home that night actually excited, telling me executives were finally paying attention to his team's growth potential. He kissed my forehead and said something about maybe getting promoted soon. I smiled at him and said, "That would be wonderful, Theodore." It was the last true smile I gave him as his wife. Friday morning I dressed carefully, not flashy, not humble either. A simple cream-colored dress, my hair pulled back, my father's old watch on my wrist, the one thing I always wore when I needed to remember who I really was. I arrived at Haldon Textiles through the private entrance reserved for board members, the one Theodore had never once used in his year working there. Talia met me in the executive hallway, her face tight with the kind of nervous energy that comes before something big. "They're all seated," she said. "Theodore and Priya just walked in. They think this is a routine growth meeting." "Good," I said, "let's not disappoint them." The boardroom was full when I walked in, 12 board members, 3 department heads, and near the back, Theodore and Priya sitting close together, looking comfortable, looking like a couple who believed the whole world belonged to them. I watched Theodore's eyes find me as I entered. Confusion crossed his face first, then something closer to shock as I walked past the guest seats and took the chair at the head of the table, the chair reserved for the controlling shareholder. The room went quiet. "Good morning," I said, and my voice didn't shake at all. "For those who don't know me, my name is Sophia Haldon. I am the majority shareholder of this company, inherited from my father, and I've called this meeting personally." Priya's face changed slowly, like ice cracking. She looked at Theodore, then back at me, then at the small gold nameplate someone had placed at my seat that read simply Haldon. "Sophia," Theodore said quietly, "what is this?" "This," I said, "is the meeting where we discuss growth and accountability." I nodded to Talia, who dimmed the lights and started the recording without another word from me. Theodore's voice filled the room. "Once we push out the older managers, there's room for both of us to move up fast." Priya's voice followed. "And once you're senior enough, we don't need anyone else's approval for anything. Dead weight goes first, then we're set." Nobody in that room breathed. I watched Priya's confident posture collapse in real time, her shoulders curling inward, her hand gripping the edge of the table like she could stop what was happening by holding on tight enough. Theodore's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing without any words coming out. "That recording," I said calmly, "was taken from an internal compliance system during an official strategy meeting for this department. Every board member here has now heard, in your own voices, a plan to sabotage colleagues and manipulate this company's structure for personal gain." "Sophia," Theodore started, "I can explain." "You can," I said, "but first let's talk about something else. 3 days ago at a cafe, this woman," I gestured to Priya without looking directly at her, "told me I was poor, that I would always be poor, that someone like me didn't belong with a man like Theodore." I let that sentence sit in the silence. "She said that to the majority shareholder of the company that pays both of your salaries, to the daughter of the man who built this company from 2 sewing machines in a rented room, to a woman who has spent 3 years living quietly, letting people underestimate her because she wanted to be loved for who she was, not what she owned." Priya's voice came out small. "I didn't know." "No," I said, "you didn't, and that's the problem with people like you. You measure worth by handbags and dress labels, and you never once consider that the quiet woman across the table might hold your entire future in her hands." I turned to the board. "I'm recommending the immediate termination of Priya Malhotra's contract, effective today, for conduct that violates company ethics policy and demonstrates clear intent to harm colleagues for personal advancement. I have the documentation ready for signature." 2 board members nodded immediately. One reached for the papers. Talia was already sliding across the table. Priya stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You can't do this, Theodore, tell them." But Theodore wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, his face a mixture of fear and something that almost looked like begging. "Sophia, please, we can talk about this privately." "We're done talking privately, Theodore," I said. "You've had 3 years of privacy. You used it to lie to me in my own home and plot against people in mine." The board moved quickly once the decision was made. Papers were signed. Security was called to escort Priya from the building, her red dress suddenly looking cheap under the fluorescent lights, her confidence completely gone. She didn't look at me on her way out. I think she couldn't. Theodore remained in his chair, gripping the edge of the table the same way Priya had a few minutes earlier. "What happens to me?" he asked quietly once most of the room had cleared. "That depends on you," I said. "The board has voted to strip you of your management authority, effective immediately. You'll be reassigned to a junior role with direct oversight, or you can resign. Either way, the plan you and Priya discussed dies today." "And us?" His voice cracked slightly. "What about us, Sophia?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man I had loved enough to hide my entire life for, this man who had taken that love and turned it into a hiding place for his own betrayal. "There is no us," I said. "There hasn't been for a while, you just didn't know I noticed." I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked out of that boardroom without looking back. Talia fell into step beside me in the hallway. "That was," she started. "Necessary," I finished for her. The story moved through the company fast, the way these things always do. By Monday, half the office knew. By Wednesday, it had leaked to a local business news outlet, a small article about executive misconduct at Haldon Textiles, no names mentioned directly, but enough details that anyone who worked there understood exactly what had happened. Theodore resigned before the week was over. I heard through mutual friends that Priya left the city entirely, unable to find work anywhere near her old industry once word spread about what she'd done. I filed for divorce 2 weeks after that boardroom meeting. Theodore signed the papers without much fight, maybe because he finally understood there was nothing left to fight for. We split what little we shared quietly, without lawyers shouting across tables, without dragging our 3 years through more mud than necessary. I kept the house, he took the furniture he cared about and left the rest. The last time I saw him was in a parking lot, both of us signing final paperwork through a lawyer's assistant. He looked older somehow, smaller than the man I married. "I'm sorry," he said, and for once I believed him. "I never knew who you really were." "That's the saddest part," I told him. "You were married to me for 3 years and you never once asked." I got in my car and drove away, and I didn't cry until I was almost home. Then I let myself cry for exactly 1 traffic light, wiped my face, and kept driving. 6 months later, Haldon Textiles opened 2 new international offices under my direct leadership. I stopped hiding behind quiet administrative titles and started showing up in board meetings as exactly who I was, the woman who owned the company, who built on what her father started, who no longer needed anyone's approval to take up space in her own life. Talia got promoted to Senior Operations Director. She deserved it after everything. Sometimes I think about that afternoon in the cafe, about Priya's red dress and her confident laugh, about the way she looked at my worn handbag like it told her everything she needed to know about my worth. She wasn't entirely wrong, actually. That handbag did tell a story, just not the one she thought. It told the story of a woman who never needed expensive things to prove her value, because her value was never something that could be bought or measured by a stranger's glance. It told the story of patience, of quiet strength, of a woman who let herself be underestimated because she was too busy building something real to correct every wrong assumption people made about her. I don't hide anymore, not my ownership, not my strength, not the truth of who I am. I learned that staying small to make someone else comfortable isn't kindness, it's just fear wearing a nice smile. These days, when people ask about the divorce, about the scandal that made small waves through the business community, I just tell them the truth. My husband's mistress once told me I was poor. She had no idea she was talking to the woman who owned everything. If this story moves something in you, I want you to remember this one thing. The people who underestimate you today are often standing on ground you built without them even noticing. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who has already decided not to see it. Just keep building, keep growing, and when the truth finally comes out, let it speak louder than you ever needed to. If you believe in quiet strength over loud revenge, subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were really talking to? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.